Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another story mix. Got some stories for you guys on Datora this time. Got some classic Moonflower, got some combinations here, all filled with delirium. I know Datora is a staple you guys love, so of course we had to bring another mix of it. But these are some wild reports, some you'll definitely enjoy. I'll just let them speak for themselves. But let me know what I should cover next. I'm sure you'll enjoy these, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. Datora trip to an ancient underworld. It started when a friend of mine told me about some Datora he found growing down by the banks of the Willamette River. He was a Native American and warned me to only smoke it, saying if I did eat some seeds, it would be extremely dangerous, but I'd see the realm of death and chaos. I was very young, 17-ish, and very uneducated about psychoactive substances. I picked mushrooms a few times and tried acid a few times. I thought it would be a good idea to take a few friends down to the river to look for this wicked looking plant that was described to me by my native friend. We walked for about 5 minutes through wet underbrush and overcast sky until we saw a sandy clearing where only a few plants were growing beside the water. There, right in the middle of the seemingly desolate sand dune, was two 4-foot tall datura plants. We knew right away it was them from 20 or so feet away, both scraggly with sharp-pointed leaf and beautiful white trumpet-shaped flowers. The flower pointed up to the dreary gray sky as if to tell us we'd found what we were looking for. One plant was green and had some bug damage, and the other one was a beautiful purple on the stems. Both were creepy but intriguing. We were going to smoke the leaf and flower like we were told, but when we saw the armored spikes that protected the fruit, we decided to hell with smoking it. We'd just take a few pods and eat a couple seeds. That was probably a bad idea in retrospect, but we were young and bored with the crap weather lately. Eventually, we ended up at a friend's house where we played some pool and I busted out the seed pods after I lost my game. I said why not try a few and see how it goes. The seeds were extremely bitter. At first, we only split half a pod with 4 people, so we ate about 25 to 50 seeds each. Waiting half an hour was difficult for me, but I did and then made the mistake to eat a whole pod because I wasn't feeling it yet. My friends ate more too, and we watched a movie with Halle Berry in it, which I can't remember at all, but I think we forgot we ate the seeds because right after the movie, I realized I was supposed to be at work. I don't know how I drove to work, but before I left, my friends were telling me that they didn't feel good and that their throats were getting scratchy. I just thought they wanted to go to bed, so I got in my car and left, I guess. I don't remember driving to the pizza place I worked at, but I got there fine. My boss walked up to me and started telling my coworkers they should be more like me because I was always early or some shit, but he walked away too quickly to notice I wasn't acting quite right. I had forgotten I had eaten any datura at this point and thought it was a normal day at work. It was anything but normal. Seemed like 10 minutes had passed, and the next thing I know is I'm trying to place the pizzas in the brick oven to the one side so they don't disturb the bug nest on the other side. This felt so natural to me. I knew the bugs didn't want their pizza clogging up their lair that was made out of what looked like other dead bugs, mostly spiders and shiny black beetles. I did this for what felt like an hour before my boss saw what I was doing. He came up to me and started dribbling dirt and blood out of his mouth, and I couldn't understand him. So I got upset and asked him what he was going on about. I only remember him freaking out and ripping my car keys out of my hands as he pushed me out of the door of his restaurant. I must have forgot that this just happened because I went right up to my car and tried to put imaginary keys into every hole I could find on my car. My boss later told me I was croaking like a frog and tossing pizzas on the ground about 10 feet from the oven. And then I was moving the imaginary pizzas around in the oven like I was trying to get them out, but really every pizza was on the floor in front of me. He also stated that a customer complained about seeing this happen, and she tried to ask me if I was alright, but I just told her there was no fingernails on her pizza. Another coworker said they saw me in the freezer trying to drink wine out of a big box, but instead of drinking it, I was spitting it on the floor. I remember only bits and pieces of the restaurant, but I remember having band practice after I was kicked out of work. There, I was treated completely normal by my bandmates, and I again had forgotten I was on anything. Band practice ended, and I walked home after talking to my drummer for a bit. He mentioned that he took some Datura with me, and that I was kicked out of work the day before. I remember walking home after band practice by myself, and I was able to walk into the ground as deep as I wanted to. I could see layers of time saved in the rocks and dirt, and I totally lost track of the sidewalk above me and could see no light from the moon, but I could see very well in the dark for some reason. I remember walking through the same cemetery I always walk through, but this time my perspective was from below the caskets. I saw signs from many of them, each one mentioning hell, like this way to hell, or hell next left. Every sign spaced in a way that by the time I forgot about the last one, another one would come into view. There were dinosaur and dragon bones, treasure, and little bottles with glowing liquid of different colors to be found everywhere around me in the earth. I wanted none of it. I kept looking for water, but found it would turn into sand in my mouth. The whole way home, I was dropping cigarettes and having conversations with my drummer like he was with me, but he went to a concert and later said he was talking to me while he watched the drummer at the show he was at. He mentioned things like throw sparks at people and open cosmic doorways with his mind. I eventually got home after finding a ladder out of the layers of dirt. I thought I was trapped in and walked onto my street where all my neighbors were out in their front yards, where they were spraying blood out of their mouths onto each other like a bunch of fleshly blood sprinklers. I then went into my house where I found my dad looking very concerned. He started talking to me and I couldn't understand him. He was making clicks, beeps, and random laser sounds. I tried to talk to him, but later he told me I was croaking like a frog and he didn't understand me. I was asking him if I could have some water, and he gave me some, and I went to bed and woke up to what I think was the next day, but who knows. I later found out that my friends had horrible times and nightmarish visions, while I was having an epic journey looking for water that wouldn't turn into sand. My friends were pretty mad at me for a while, as were their parents. My boss said he wasn't mad. He was just glad I left my car in his lot instead of driving, even though he wouldn't give me the keys anyways. He said I only wasted about 10 pizzas and that he could live with that. Him and my dad both knew what I was on when they saw me. They did it when they were kids too. I only wish parents would tell their bored ass little brats what the fuck is up instead of laughing it off like they did. One of my friends wasn't as lucky as the rest of us. He ended up in the ICU in a coma for 2 weeks, where he almost died several times. Did I learn my lesson from this experience? Nope. That was just the first time I tried a nightshade plant. It's many years later, and I can say my native friend was right. We should have just smoked it like he did when he was out of pot. The Torah doesn't fuck around, and if you just have to try it like I did, and still do, smoke it instead. It's much tamer. Peace out, Mike. Dosed by Kids. I am a 27-year-old and I do a lot of venturing to the astral plane without the use of any drugs. I was looking for something to open my mind even more. I'm friends with the neighborhood teens, and they told me of a flower that was growing in a neighbor's yard that they boil and drink to get high. They told me I should try it, so I did. They showed up that night with 7 fully blossomed flowers they were calling angel trumpets. They warned me over and over that the dry cotton mouth that occurs is severe and to have plenty of water around. They boiled the flowers in about 3 cups of water. I added a shitload of sugar to it, filled a large mug with ice, and poured the elixir into it. It was very yellow, like piss. It tasted fine, with a weird aftertaste. They didn't want any for themselves, so I drank it down rather quickly. Upon finishing, they informed me that they had only one flower when they got high. I immediately started to freak. I ran to the PC, got online, and tried to research angel trumpets ASAP. Then it hit me. My body started feeling buzzy. It was almost numb. I started getting a very dry mouth. I mean, big time. So I tried to chug water. I tried to walk, but I kept crashing, and I mean crashing hard. It was as if something was swinging me around, throwing me into walls. I could not walk. I was falling over everything. I crashed for the last time in the middle of the floor and passed out. I had not hallucinated. I woke up in the AM to my alarm clock. I have to be at work. When I woke up, there were 5 mentally insane, deformed, mutated small people on my couch staring at me. They would not speak. They would hiss at me. I thought they were real. I went to get my shotgun and they started to disappear. I saw a lady with no arms or legs, but it was my lamp. The hallucinations were crazy. I drank the potion down at about 10 p.m. that night. It was now 7 a.m., and I was seeing everything. I can go on and on about what I saw, but I feel it's irrelevant. I hallucinated in my car, driving to work. I work at a desk all day by a window. I hallucinated till around 3 p.m. that day. My eyes were dilated severely. They still are, and it's 3 days past. Oh, yeah, I woke up in a puddle of blood. My hands and feet were cut, and I have a 50-cent piece sized chunk out of the right side of my ass. Some sort of puncture. I have no idea how I cut myself. The best thing that came out of it is the fact that I know what is going to happen about 3 to 5 minutes in advance. I can see stupid things that are of no big meaning before they happen. The thoughts just appear in my head. Then they happen. I feel I had a major overdose and that I am lucky to be alive. My body is pretty torn up, and I have no recollection of how it happened. Also, the day after, I cannot remember anything short term. That was annoying. And my dog eyed me down when I awoke. He seemed like he wanted to growl at me. He was acting very weird. Oh, yeah, I had managed to get to the bathroom in the midst of being thrown around. I tried to puke, but nothing came up. I had thought that I was going insane that morning, but now, 3 days passed, and I feel fine. Be careful. Do not overdose like I did. Be careful and have plenty of water around, and do not do it alone. Take care. It's a desert out there. Just some backstory. I'm Greek, so my English might not be good. I have been hesitant on sharing this because it is a major downward spiral in my life, and the long term effects are nothing short of catastrophic. Since this has happened, I have seen and still hear things all around. They are getting better. So now, on with the actual report. There's a plant out there called datura, and it is highly poisonous. Usually they are commonly known as thorn apples or jimson weeds, but are also known as devil's trumpets. Other common names include moonflower, devil's weed, and hell's bells. I've never had any psychedelic before. I've only smoked weed. A couple weeks ago, me and a friend, Bob, were in a near fatal motor vehicle accident. He ended up in a medically induced coma. He's fully recovered since then. I've had a few fractured ribs. Also, my clavicle was fucked up. A couple of days ago, me and my other friend Vic were chilling at my house after visiting Reese in the hospital. My parents were currently away in another country due to their jobs and are sort of stuck there, so they've been gone for a good while. So Vic and I were at my house, and he said that he had something that would make us really high. And I asked him what it was, and he said it was Datora. I've never really heard of it, so he told me that it gets you really high and you have a good time. Pause. Note to audience. I was very naive and ignorant in this situation. All of this fucking shit would have been avoided if I just went to Google. Continue. At the time, 4 days after the accident, I was just happy to have something that could help me escape this hell with my injuries and elevate my mental state from the car accident. So he pulled out 4 to 5 spiky balls from this bag. He cut them open, and there was about 2 to 400 seeds. He also had some leaves. I was freaking out because I had no idea what was going to happen. He said we had to make tea, so we ground the seeds up and put the powder into a tea bag and made tea. It was a dark green color, and it smelled very strange. We each ate a couple leaves. They tasted horrible, and I almost threw up. Then we drank the tea. It was so bad. It tasted like someone dumped a bunch of vinegar in iced tea. After that, we were watching an anime, and I kept looking over at him, making sure he was okay. He asked me if I was feeling anything yet, and I said no. So he said fuck it, and we each had another cup of tea. About 15 minutes passed, and I really had to take a piss. I got up, and as soon as I stood straight, I could feel my body moving, like when you stand up on a bus and begin to move around. I was mentally aware of everything. Not a thing had changed, except my body was swaying, and I had no control over it. I made my way to the bathroom, and Vic was walking the doorway, facing the toilet. I told him to move, because I had to piss. He started laughing, and when I moved my head, he was inside the floor, like some type of illusion. I blinked, and then he wasn't there anymore. I got to the toilet and began to unzip myself and began to piss, but when it hit the water, there was this dark red, like a dark burgundy was mixing. I was slightly alarmed, but brushed it off as normal for some reason and walked out of the bathroom. But as soon as I stepped out of the bathroom, I was in a rainy alleyway in what looked like Japan with neon signs everywhere. I saw an old friend pass me on a bike, so I shouted to him. He turned around and told me that he saw my mom and she was worried because she didn't see me respond to her texts and calls. Then he told me I needed to follow him. I agreed and started to follow him, and when we stopped, he told me to go in there, and I went to say thank you, but he wasn't there. I walked into the random house we stopped at, and I stepped into my room and saw Vic and Aslo laying on my bed, watching Pulp Fiction. I asked them if my mom was calling me on my phone, and they just looked at me and told me not to worry and watch TV with them. I sat down on my bed with them, looked at the TV, and there was seeping blood from the edges of it. I turned to ask them if they saw blood, but there was no one there but very small people that were messing with the remote. I ran downstairs, scared at what I saw, and the stairway was a long flesh like hallway with old stretchers with people wearing one of my favorite hoodies. I saw my friend Victor and told him that I think I need to go to a hospital, and he told me that the doors were locked and I can't leave. I got agitated and told him I need to leave. He started laughing and telling me it's a desert out there. But when I finally focused on his face, there was no one there, and I was wearing my hamper on my head, sitting on the kitchen table. Vic and Aslo were telling me to calm down and that the neighbors were going to come in and kill me if I didn't quiet down. I tried listening to what they were saying, but I saw my mom looking at me through the window, pointing at her phone. I grabbed my phone off the table after I took off the hamper and proceeded to unlock it, only to find out I was holding a clothing iron. Luckily, it was unplugged. I dropped it and heard someone say, "Ouch," really loud, and I looked down and I was in the floor, seeing myself. I fell down, and when I hit the ground and opened my eyes, I was outside in a huge blank canvas of white. I saw Vic and Aslo, ran up to them, and then my surroundings were becoming more clearer. I was confused why they were talking, but I couldn't hear anything. And then I felt a sharp pain in my chest and found myself on the ground outside. That sharp pain I felt was my falling 7 feet into the grass. I laid there and saw something coming out of the sun. It looked like a lion, which I've never seen one before. I heard a very loud banging noise and people laughing, so I turned and saw someone repeatedly shooting themselves in the head with a shotgun, and there were random people laughing. This was looping over and over like a GIF or something. I sat upright, and my mom brought me a book and told me to read it because I was getting sick. I looked up from the ground, and the sky ceiling was lifted off by a giant red human figure. They didn't have a face. They were like a big red stick man. This is where I don't remember much, and my friends fill in the detail. They tell me that I was telling them that they were crazy for letting beet frogs inside our house, and they told me you kept picking up objects and looking at them and talking about various topics that made no sense. Apparently, I picked up a lamp, took the lampshade off, and said something like, "Don't pull open the door when water is cheaper for the freight trains." They told me when they tried talking to me, it was like I was staring right through them, and as if I was focused on something behind them or didn't recognize them. They recall various times when I would be looking for a cigarette or a blunt. One time, they said I said, was going on a date with destiny, and I was looking for a condom. This trip overlaps into a coma. This is where I started to come out of my coma. I fell down again, and I woke up in a closet. Blood was covered on my hands, and parts of my arms had deep cuts in them. I looked around and saw Victor and Ashley staring at me wide-eyed. I asked them what happened, and the next day they explained everything. I was teleported to a huge underground complex, and I couldn't see anyone's face because no one was looking at me. I felt something familiar, and it made me want to cry. I was overwhelmed with emotion, and the word Matira came to mind. Mom came to mind, and I saw this giant tsunami about to consume me. And in the noise of it, I heard a loud and deep commanding voice saying, "I love you, so live." I remember I jolted in the hospital bed and started crying so much that I couldn't even see anything. Finally, I regained myself and looked around, but everything was so blurry, and all I could smell was my mother's perfume. I won't bore you with the details, but this was a crazy moment and was life-changing. They told me that Vic called Aslo while I was going crazy. Basically, I went crazy and was yelling about how our neighbors are spies, and I started to take a long roller and run it all around the house and my body. They said I would stare at random objects and talk to them. I would run into walls and everything else. They tried to stop me, so they eventually called an ambulance, and I was restrained, and then I slipped into a coma and spent about 2 to 3 days of being in a hospital. By this time, my parents flew home and were at the hospital all 86 hours I was in a coma. It took me about 3 hours to type all that. It's been 18 months, and I'm recovering much better now. I'm almost fully recovered. I've still been seeing some slight things or hearing things, but everything is much better. I can barely remember what's happened in just a week and need to take medication now for sleep and other things. God had been a big contributor to my recovery, and quite frankly, I'm sure that He pulled me out of my deathly slumber. I love Jesus, and He's just been so amazing this past year and this new year, constantly changing my life and helping me see this as a learning moment and something that I can help other people through rather than something I should shy away from. I just want to say to everyone considering doing the Torah, by whatever means, don't do it. It's not worth it. I have no reason I should be alive right now. I'm living every day now as if it was my last. Live long and love hard. We need each other. Don't take the risk. Thanks for listening to this crazy story. It's up to you whether to believe it or not, but I know for sure that I was at the footsteps of death, just disguised as a plant. Take care, it's a desert out there. Kalo Katavotio. Godspeed, Mike. Foul weed of pure evil. I'm writing this report in the hopes that someone wanting to try the Torah, aka Jimson weed, will read it and think otherwise. Everything started about 6 or 7 months ago. I have been an avid psychonaut for more than a few years, and have tried everything I could get my hands on. The school year was coming to a close, and I had been partying quite a bit, doing mostly synthetic drugs. A couple of bad experiences with Xanax and MDMA made me want to stay away from designer drugs for a while. At the time, I had been reading Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan series and was becoming more and more intrigued by the yerba del diablo that is so prevalent in these stories. So I began researching the substance online. I found out a great deal of information on the plant. Seemed like nobody had bad things to say about it except the idiots that took too much. I live in Texas, so Jimson weed grows everywhere. The first plant I took specimens from was near where I worked at the time. I started my experiment small with 1 flower and 3 mid-sized leaves. I had a great night, not too intense, but enough to show me what this plant could do. The next day, I didn't notice any of the vision impairment that most people talk about, just really bad dry mouth and an inability to remember many of the events of the night before. The next weekend rolls around and I'm looking for something to do as usual. I went out that day and collected a bunch of leaves and 2 flowers. I went to a friend's house and told him what I had. He was skeptical and a little afraid to take it. I cooked up a batch for both of us and hurriedly drank it off, offering the other half to my pal. I once again had a great night and tripped my balls off. My friend said he felt nothing but a tightness in the throat and not being able to sleep. 2 days later, I was going to a party and didn't feel like dealing with the BS involved with finding drugs. So I went to the neighborhood Datura plant. I made a very strong brew, then I called it heroic and a righteous sacrament. Now I call it plain fucking stupid. I drank it an hour prior to the party and was already on my way when I got there. While there, I got thoroughly trashed, drinking keg beer and impressing people with my ability to drink massive amounts of hard liquor without passing out. It seems alcohol had a strange effect when mixed with this stuff. By the end of the night, I was completely delirious and really freaking people out. Luckily, I had a few friends there who made me leave with them before the cops were called. They told me they were going to bring me to Jay's house. About 10 seconds later, I forgot where we were going and told the driver he could just let me out anywhere. He said no. At the next light we stopped, I asked how much I owed for the ride. I really thought I was in a yellow, checkered cab. Later in the ride, I tried to exit the vehicle on the highway, stating, 5th and Lamar, that's my stop. Thank God someone else was in the back seat with me, or I might have made it out the door. I decided to stay away from it a while after that, but didn't make it very far. About 4 days after the party, I got a fair amount of extremely good kind bud. Of course, the best thing to do with nugs is roll a big fat cone, so that's exactly what I did. So I get a good homeboy, and we start puffing away. Halfway through the thing, I notice small variations on my peripheral vision, and a body high very different from Mary Jane. My buddy looks over at me, staring off into space, and tells me that I look zoinked. I peer into my watch face to discover that I have a full set of moon eyes. After a couple minutes, I am fully tripping, but not having fun. It seems like all the Datura peaks came back to me at once. No gradual buildup, just full visuals and auditory hallucinations. This only lasted 15 to 20 minutes, but it sure did freak me out. After smoking weed a few more times, I found that it was only the really good stuff that made it come back like that. A few people found out that I knew a way to make people trip for free. I told them I would make it, but they had to bring me the plants. I told them where a few could be procured, and they went out one night and pulled up 2 whole plants. They came back, and I cooked up a batch and also instructed them on how to do so. These 3 kids drank the stuff and then bailed, leaving me with about 1.5 plants worth of leaves and flowers plus a few seed pods. I didn't want to take anything that night because I was going through some shit with my girlfriend. I sat around a while, probably drank a few beers, then something weird started happening. I was on the couch. The plant material was in a box in a corner behind me. The TV was on, so there was plenty of noise at the time. It's very hard to describe, but it was almost like a deafening silence would come from the corner on regular intervals, almost like a foghorn. This noise would come about every minute or so and leave after maybe 10 seconds. I would turn around and look to where it was coming from, but every time I did, it would stop. I eventually cooked up a dose and sat around the house all night staring at the walls and talking to people that weren't there. I awoke the next morning to a blinding light in my eyes. After a quick location check, I found that I was on the roof. At this time, I had a sock tied across my forehead. I was in my boxers alone, which had somehow been torn almost to shreds. A phone cord was tied to my left ankle, and my knees were badly skinned up. I was obviously very confused by all this. I still can't remember what I did that night. This cycle went on for a few months. Before long, I was doing it at least twice a week, and hallucinating almost constantly because of all the bud I was smoking. I lost many friends during this time, most of them because of how much I had changed. Towards the end, I could feel myself losing any remnants of a soul. I felt really dumb all the time. I couldn't remember the simplest things, like my girlfriend's phone number. I eventually lost her too because of the Torah. It was taking at least 3 minutes to answer any question I was asked. The few friends that still hung out with me got tired of it and started making many decisions for me. I was completely in her grips and couldn't stop taking it. All summer was lost to her. When the school year started again, I became extremely pissed off and depressed because I couldn't take her as much and I couldn't do it at school. The depression lasted about a month. I had even started doing a lot of synthetic drugs again to try to make myself happy. I got real skinny and lost even more friends. I still would do the Torah on the weekends, and on one occasion I can remember still disturbs me. I had done a big dose on a Sunday afternoon. This brew contained a handful of leaves and maybe 30 dry seeds crushed up. All the hallucinations I saw that night were red. Before they had been a rainbow of shimmers. This time, just red. I even dreamed in red. When I woke up the next morning, I felt as if I could demolish a house with my bare hands. I wanted to lift heavy things and break something. I also remember saying aloud, I think I'll hurt someone today. I went off to school after smoking some reefer. When I got there, I stopped to talk to this kid who wanted to buy some ganja off me. While I was standing there, someone walking by stepped on my foot. For some reason, this just set me off. I took a few steps towards this kid who now had his back to me, walking away. I want to say before going on that I am normally not a violent person. I am 6 foot tall and very strong though, so I don't have to be. Most people leave me alone. I grabbed this kid by the back of his neck and pushed him face first into a brick wall. When I turned him around, he was already bleeding. I proceeded to pummel this guy, beating him about the face and chest. I kicked his ass bad, and when I finally let him go, 3 of his friends were coming my way. They didn't make it. I was like a man possessed. I could see the bloodlust. It was like a red film permeating my vision. The first kid I got took a left hook in the mouth and spit out a tooth. The second got butt-headed and thrown bodily from the fray. I tackled the one who hadn't made a move yet and sat on his chest, punching him until he passed out. It took a cop and 2 hall monitors to restrain me. I claimed they tried to jump me, so I only got suspended. I was actually commended for being able to fend off 4 guys. This really freaked me out. I don't like to hurt people, but at the time, it seemed like the only option. I couldn't have stopped myself if I wanted to. One weekend I was determined not to do her anymore, so I went out to a show. I came in contact with a dealer I knew a long time back, and she hooked me up with the best rolls I have ever had. Pure MDMA. There's just nothing like it. I ate 2 double stacks that night and was actually able to open up and talk to someone about all the bad shit I had been doing. I saw through her lies for the first time. I would no longer be under her control. Slowly but surely, with the absence of the Torah in my system, my soul and life started returning along with my cognitive brain functions. Since that night, I haven't gone near her or wanted to, and I feel fucking wonderful. The joy of a beautiful day now replaces the want to drink Madman Brew. I still do synthetic drugs, but not very often. The HPPD caused by the Datura still returns mildly whenever I get really stoned, but I can live with it. As a final note, it is true that the Torah can bring glorious insights and even power if I desire it, but it does so at a very high cost. I am still trying to rebuild the many bridges I burned and get back to my life as it was before. Please, if you are thinking about trying this dangerous drug, just learn from my story. It's not worth the pain. I'm probably very lucky I didn't die taking the large doses I did. Peace and Buddha bless. Dark and hopeless hell. When I was 18, I was in a strange place in the world. I was homeless, penniless, and had no real ambition to pull myself out of the gutter. Although I was without the basic necessities of food and shelter, I had a steady supply of drugs that were dispensed out of sympathy by many of my friends. I went to sleep hungry and cold every night, but never sober. One evening, before I left a party to hit the streets to a broom closet or stairwell to lay my head on, a guy I barely knew gave me a large freezer bag full of brown spiky pods. "What are these?" "Jimson weed. The seeds will make you trip. Maybe you can sell them. I don't want them." He told me to split the pod open and eat half of the seeds if I really wanted to trip hard. To me, that meant eat the whole seed pod, since I always found recommended dosages to be unsatisfying. I chose not to dose that night, since I was already tired and afraid I might fall asleep before the trip kicked in. I slept in a building gutted by a fire a few years before, and the freezing November air woke me just before dawn. I got up and walked into town to raise my body temperature and to avoid hyperthermia. This was my daily morning ritual. Obviously, 5 a.m. in a small city offers very little in terms of recreation, so I decided it was the right time to open the door of perception and began my day with a psychedelic breakfast. I chose the largest pod in the bag, which was also the darkest color. I was told afterward the most potent seeds are the deepest brown. The seeds were terribly bitter, and many of the shells got stuck in my teeth. I managed to finish the entire pod with a little help from a public water fountain. I watched a beautiful sunrise from the roof of an apartment building, constantly waiting for the effects of the Jimson weed to take effect. I can't say how long I sat until the seeds started working, but the first noticeable signs came in the form of extreme thirst and general physical discomfort. Finding the feelings of seeming dehydration were too strong to ignore, so I went by to a nearby McDonald's for free ice water. It must have been after 9 because the only people in the restaurant were old guys getting free refills on senior citizen discounted coffee. I sat in a booth in the back corner, sipping water through a cracked straw, watching the thirsty elderly redneck parade. It didn't take long for me to realize I was entering into a very hallucinogenic trip. The fact that I hadn't eaten a real meal in a week and I was sleep deprived probably added to the drug's intensity, but I can't imagine a big dinner and a full 8 hours would have made too much of a difference. Unlike the onset of an E or acid trip, my mental state was very comfortable, but my physical condition felt quite unhealthy. My heavy sense of inebriation was quickly followed by powerful, disorienting visuals. Though they weren't disturbing, they seemed as clear as sunlight. Black cats milled about the floor in front of me, so numerous I couldn't even see the tile. They appeared wet and angry. There was a deep crimson blood dripping from the ceiling. Everything was technicolor. The sense of detachment was strong, but it didn't feel strange. Each hallucination flowed into the next. I was holding a very old Bible in my lap. I couldn't figure out how to open it. Soon, it started to leak blood too. The more I struggled, the more it bled. As soon as I realized my efforts were futile, the book materialized into the air around me. It didn't seem strange to me. When I analyzed the room again, it was a bustling, futuristic metropolis. It appeared very large and very alien, with shining chrome and flashing lights everywhere. I began to feel discomfort and the strong urge to urinate simultaneously. I staggered into the bathroom and vomited in the closest urinal, right in front of an Amish man. Now I live in south central Pennsylvania, so it's very possible that he was really there, but considering my state and other people's accounts of the Torah-induced visuals, I suspect he was just a hallucination. I do know that I relieved myself somewhere in the bathroom and left through the side exit adjacent to the lavatory door. The street outside was a scene of World War II ravaged Europe. I don't know which country, but everyone on the street was garbed in Nazi military uniform. I felt very threatened. I ran into the alley behind the parking lot and hid behind a pine tree. The anxiety soon ebbed, but the thirst and need to urinate returned. I knew I needed a comfort zone, a place I could relax in. A friend lived nearby. I walked to his apartment complex and stood in front of the stairwell. The same crimson blood from the McDonald's was cascading down the steps. It began to rise over my shoes, up my legs. A heavy sense of vertigo came over me. There's a memory gap between the stairs and my friend's apartment, but I ended up on his couch watching dolphins dive through the wall in a seamless loop. During my time there, I experienced the typical non-existent cigarette search and the disappearing person puzzle. I visited the bathroom many times, but eliminated very little. The sense of dehydration was unbearable. There was no comfort. I didn't recognize the people in the room. I asked the person closest to me where Bill was. "Bill's not here," was the return. I closed my eyes to escape the growing sense of panic, but when my eyelids shut, all I saw was a new room with new people. Where was I? I tried to reopen my eyes, but it only revealed another room with yet more strangers. This went on and on. I don't know if my eyes were open or shut. I didn't know where I was, what time it was, or what was happening. My panic turned into sensory collapse. Everything bled together, and I felt a deep spiraling sensation engulf me. I lost all visual capabilities, but I still had a very real sense of touch. I was trapped in a small metallic box. It made perfect sense to me. I was dead. This was hell. There were no demons, no hellfire or brimstone, just a deep, complete feeling of darkness and hopelessness. This was the never-ending void. Not at all how I imagined it, but worse than I thought it could have been. I've had feelings of infinite emotion on acid trips and sensations of universal truth in K-holes, but this was the most profound reality I had ever experienced. My whole existence was put into perspective, and I was being punished for wasting the gift of life. I blacked out at some point in the box and woke up in my friend's apartment the next day. He said I was out for about 8 hours. The physical effects wore off about a day later, but the psychological impression has yet to fade. Datura is boundless. Datura is powerful beyond words. Datura is poison. A late summer night's dream. I like to consider myself a very knowledgeable and for the most part responsible drug user. I know my limits and very rarely do I push them to the breaking point of blacking out and losing control of my bodily functioning. Every other time but this, I was drinking alcohol. But on this particular experience, I trip harder than I ever tripped on LSD, mushrooms, DXM, salvia, etc. I've experimented in large amounts with most substances I've used, but on my first encounter with Morning Glory, I lived a dream for 4.5 hours and woke up 15 hours later, only to find myself in my roommate's swim shorts and my other roommate's dress shirt flipped inside out. Never have I heard of anything this bizarre and just fucking weird than what happened to me 2 nights ago when a few of my friends came back from a Chili Peppers concert in Denver and saved me 1 pod from a moonflower. I've wanted to try Morning Glory for a while, so when my friends told me about their crazy trip, I seized the opportunity. I knew that if I wanted to extract the chemical, it would take a while, and I've heard people eating them and still tripping, so that's what I decided around 7:40 p.m. I cut open the pokey green pod and found not even 100 bright orange seeds. I thought that they might need to be dried, but since S-Dog, Gassman, and Quasnout tripped balls in Denver by the same means of ingestion, I figured I would be in the clear. I scooped all the seeds into my mouth and munched them up for about 5 minutes until I was left with a nasty mush and swallowed it all down with Gatorade. With the amount that I took, I never expected that before I finally lay to rest that night, I would be wandering outside of my townhouse, naked, or taking sips off my bottle of Nivea aftershave. 20 minutes after ingestion, I noticed a slight difference in my perception. I was only able to notice the come up, which didn't stop. I never felt the come down because I was asleep during it. At first, I was really pleased with how I was feeling, but after about an hour of sitting around, watching TV, and bullshitting with my friends, I began to get irritated, partly because the effects weren't really increasing as much as I expected, and partly because I had to piss and couldn't. For the next hour, I started getting a little worried because I felt like I needed to take a leak. But despite all of my attempts of turning on the sink, flushing the toilet, and pushing like hell, I couldn't muster more than a few drops until 10:30–11 p.m., when I felt absolutely horrible from having dry mouth and started to feel almost nauseous. I also noticed my skin was a bright red color and felt extremely warm. Because of the low intensity of effects, I really didn't feel like being awake if I was just going to feel like shit all night and not experience anything more than a mild shift of perception, loss of some motor skills, and a few tracers. So, I decided to hit the hay early, and amazingly, I was able to piss just before I went to bed. I took 5 milligrams of melatonin and laid down feeling uncomfortable and restless, but eventually I succumbed to sleep, to the last of my conscious recollection. When I awoke at 7 p.m. the next day, I felt refreshed and more awake than I felt in a long time. The night before, I had the most vivid dreams I've ever had. During these dreams, there are several reoccurring themes that keep happening to me. Every time I would see Dirty D's face, he would ask me if I was doing alright, and I couldn't understand why he would ask me that, because I felt fine. So I look at him and say, yeah, of course, why wouldn't I be fine? I think he asked me that maybe 4 to 5 more times, getting more concerned each time, but every time I gave the same reply, or some other variation of the same. Another thing that kept pissing me off was that I fell down probably 5 times. All I remember is walking down my staircase, losing my balance, and stumbling/sliding before I would get to the bottom. I can remember one occurrence when I took 2 steps and rolled the rest of the way down the carpeted staircase. I don't remember any pain. I would also try to sit down wherever it was I thought I was, but only hit the ground with a hard thud. I think I did that twice, looking around afterwards for the person who pulled my chair up, only to find that there wasn't even a chair and I was sitting on the floor outside my kitchen. This last reoccurring theme that happened was the one that freaked the fuck out of me and really brought me back to reality. I remember talking to quite a few people throughout the whole experience, but not remembering what we were talking about most of the time. 3 times I was standing outside somewhere during the daytime and talking to about 10 to 15 people, recognizing only some, about God knows what. All 3 times I would notice one person sticking out in the crowd, and as I paid more attention to him, he became clearer and clearer. He was tall and had dark hair. He looked so familiar, but I just couldn't think of who this person was. When he was only a few feet away from me, I could tell that his lips were moving, and as I watched, I noticed his lips were moving as I was talking. Suddenly, it dawned on me like a wave of every feeling, good and bad, that I could feel. I was surprised, stunned, speechless, happy, scared, pissed off at myself, absolutely confused, and yet realized exactly what had happened. I was standing, shirtless in my bathroom, talking to myself in the mirror. I repeated this 3 times, getting more upset after each time of realizing what I was doing again. Throughout my dream, it seemed there was no chronological order to the events that were happening. Sometimes I would be standing outside on a grassy field or in a parking lot. Other times I would be in my apartment fiddling with something or standing in my closet looking for nothing. On one of my visits to the bathroom, B-Rod, one of my roommates, was watching me as I washed my hair with what I thought I did at the time was my bottle of aftershave. I only managed to rinse a little out of my hair before I dried it off with a towel. So, as my hair dried, it became hard and crusty. As B-Rod is still staring at me, I pick up the real bottle of aftershave, and just as the taste starts to fuck with my mouth, B-Rod takes it from me and scolds me like a dog. No! And I'm dumbfounded and sincerely clueless as to why B would do that, as if he did something wrong. The last major event I clearly remember was only a second's worth, but it was pretty significant.
The only thing I recall is standing outside my walk-in closet, and there were people everywhere in my room. I looked at my friend Gaspman, and he's yelling/laughing at me to put some clothes on, and I don't pay any attention to him at all. There are other minor details about my dreams that I will touch on, but when I woke up the next day, this is all I could consciously remember. Other than the vivid and weird dreams, I didn't think the morning glory did anything special until I consulted my roommates. I woke up to S-Dog kicking the futon and told him about the crazy dreams I had the night before. After I described most of the clearer parts of my dream, S-Dog was already laughing his ass off as he stopped me and told me I wasn't dreaming. When I thought the dreams I actually remembered were fucked up, I was speechless, in disbelief, and almost frightened at the insanity that actually took place. Somehow, my entire trip, I was sleepwalking. I was told by 8 or so of my friends that I was incoherent and mumbling gibberish until almost 4 a.m., and even when I would manage to put a comprehensible sentence together, I would say something completely irrelevant to anything they were asking me. S-Dog was yelling at me for throwing a whole roll of TP in the toilet, and I responded, "I told you I didn't take your clothes out of the dryer and set them on fire." Throughout the night, I continued to go to the restroom, and as my friends and roommates began to understand the extent of how fucking gone I was, they started following and babysitting me a little closer. I was told at one point I was standing in the corner of my downstairs bathroom talking to 2 of my friends, Seven and Gumby. Another time in the upstairs bathroom, as I kneeled on my hands and knees and stared into the toilet bowl, I told Filthy I'm playing Need for Speed Most Wanted, and it's not good because the cops keep getting me. All throughout the night, I was seen moving my hands like I was playing with something, putting something together, or holding some object, even though I had nothing. I can see myself doing that because I've woken up at nights thinking I'm holding something and search for it in my bed until I realize I'm dreaming. The only thing I remember that night similar to playing with objects that weren't there was when I was lying in bed, no clue of what time it was, and I thought I had a cigarette in my hand. But when I couldn't find it, I searched my carpet frantically, looking for the butt, thinking I was going to set my room on fire. Earlier in the night, I was standing at my kitchen counter, messing with nothing, and my roommate, JP, asked me what I was doing. Apparently, I told him he needed to put a condom on an empty paper towel roll. I also told my friend Cece, I need a pipe, but you can never find any good pipes in Africa. I've never been out of the US. I was also talking to Cece in my closet by myself. Talking gibberish to random objects and people who weren't there was probably enough for my friends to handle, but as the night grew closer to morning, I began to lose grip of physical reality, throwing judgment out the window and functioning only on extremely short-term memory. I was told I could halfway answer questions if I only needed to say one word, but any more than that and I would add my own shit, according to B-Rod, traveling off on nonsense tangents and losing track of where I was and what I was doing. The night really started to go bad when I decided to take a shower. I don't remember a lot about it, but I can recall getting in and out of the shower with my clothes on quite a few times. I remember because I kept hitting my feet and shins on the metal tracks of the shower doors and stumbling forward due to the change in ground height. When I finally got in the shower naked, I stood there just peering over the shower doors at my friends, not saying a word and only rinsing my lower half. Then got out, shampooed my dry head, and washed it out in the sink. For the next 20 minutes, I was completely oblivious to the fact that I was butt-ass naked. Luckily everyone, except Filthy, who I still can't remember even being at my house, and Gassman had gone to a party. They were both sitting in my room when I got out of the bathroom, and I walked in dragging my towel. I went into my closet to change and came out, still naked and completely in another world. Gaffsman and Filthy were laughing their asses off at me and telling me to put some clothes on. Something finally must have registered, because I bent down, grabbed my invisible boxers at my ankles, and pulled them up, snapping the invisible, elastic waistband to make sure they were on. I was told that not once was I really aware that I was even fucked up. I walked around and did whatever I wanted without giving a fuck about what other people thought. I honestly don't remember one conversation or anything out of the ordinary in my behavior, but in actuality, my behavior was anything but ordinary. After wandering my room naked for a while, I walked out of the room and downstairs, leaving my friends crying in laughter. It wasn't until they heard the front door close when they realized how truly out of my fucking mind I was. I walked halfway out in the street until Filthy finally grabbed me and got me to walk inside. Once safely inside, they convinced me to put some clothes on, so I just grabbed some I saw on the ground in front of the door. There isn't too much I remember after that, but I do remember JP coming back from a party with a bunch of people. Filthy, Gassman, and I were sitting on the couch when they arrived, and all I really remember is JP complimenting me on my clothes and laughing at how ridiculous I looked, out of my mind in blue flower swimming trunks and an unbuttoned inside-out dress shirt. I remember the clothes pretty clearly because I didn't understand why I was wearing them, but I accepted it anyways. I remember looking down at myself and noticing my shirt was unbuttoned a couple times, but because it was inside out and I didn't realize it, the shirt was simply impossible for me to button up. My shorts also confused me quite a bit, but I didn't worry too much about it because I thought I was dreaming. S-Dog said I was playing with my drawstrings a lot, and I remember it, but at the time, I thought it was my cigarette and something was wrong with it. I'm not entirely sure when I finally passed out. I thought I went to bed before midnight, but apparently I was up until 4 a.m. or so. The trip was so completely different from anything I've ever experienced. There was no spiritual enlightenment or grand answers of understanding at the end of it all. Only a horrific feeling of confusion and a much greater appreciation and respect for the power of nature and everything it creates. To be under the control of a force that powerful and not even realize it had affected me is truly humbling. I have full intentions of trying Morning Glory again someday, but I'm sure as hell going to try out the seeds this time and definitely not use Moonflower, because I'm fairly sure that was the reason I was so out of my mind. I can handle traveling to weird organic worlds of spontaneous colorful forms and crazy creatures because I'm aware of and understand what I'm perceiving and know I'm physically passed out in some unsightly, embarrassing position. But when I get pissed off at my roommates for stopping me from drinking aftershave, don't have the slightest idea that I'm even walking around naked and can't even recognize my own face in the mirror, I know I've overstepped some fucked up boundaries of consciousness.
Sad story. What desperation does to the brain. Rewind back to March of 2022. It was a hot day, and my family and I were looking for some occupation. We began talking about how swimming would be nice. At this point, I already had drugs in the back of my mind, so immediately, I suggest going to the river to fish and swim. This is where tons of datura grew in the ditches right near the river. So I finally get around to coaxing my mother and father to pack up our fishing and swimming supplies, and head down to the river about 15 minutes away from our house. We get there, unload the gear, and right away, I saw vast patches of datura plants. I tell my mother and father I need to use the restroom. They obviously say, "Alright, be quick." So I made the move of running down to the datura bushes, picked up a few, came back, and acted like all was right. Little did they know the events that would take place when I ingested these flowers. I go on about the day, swimming, fishing, and enjoying the nice cool water, overlapped by the hot sun. The sun is setting, so we decide it's about time to get headed back and pack up our supplies. I find my brain to be wrapped with the thought of ingesting these flowers. So I rush to the kitchen, grab the plug-in electric crockpot, fill it up with water, and bring it to my room. I place 4 flowers in the lukewarm crockpot, close the lid, and set the heat to high. I take out my phone and scroll on Discord for a little while, until the aroma of earthy peanut butter / vegetables filled the air. The deed was done. I poured out the mucky green goop into a 28 fluid ounce cup. This concoction filled 3/4 of the cup. I downed it in one go. Putrid tasting it was. I immediately felt off, dizzy, and was producing far less saliva than normal. I sat down for another 15 minutes. All kinds of delirium thoughts flow that are hard to recall by memory. I stand up after 20 minutes or so, and the bodily heaviness hits me like a truck, accompanied by motion blur as I walk to the restroom like a robot. The motor coordination impairment was far more pronounced than dextromethorphan coordination, also called robowalking. My memory span was that of a goldfish at this point. Normally, if my parents had given me a quick glare, I'd think nothing of it. They had done the same while I was walking down the hall, already noticeably intoxicated. Their glares pierced my soul. I quickly dart to the restroom and slam the door shut. I try and piss. Nothing. It was like a concrete wall was blocking my urethra. These shits hit too hard, I said to myself. My hands and lower extremities began to violently vibrate. I was seeing spider legs on the outlines of objects, accompanied by what looked like slits in reality. My mouth was producing next to zero saliva. I was extremely thirsty, so I wandered back to the kitchen to get a cup of water. I was greeted by my parents. As suicidal, homicidal, and dysphoric delirium thoughts crossed my mind, they had said one crucial statement that changed the outcome in this next hellish 72 hours. "Are you okay, son?" I responded with a monotone, yeah." My mouth was so dry, it sounded like I spoke with a lisp. They again say, "Something's up. We can see your pupils are the size of a penny. Tell the truth, son," my mother said. I gave up the ghost and confessed. I said I was high on flowers. I never once specified the exact flower till the ambulance came. They saw I could barely walk, talk. I was even staring off into the distance. I was unblinking, wide-eyed, jaw-dropped. They later commented I had fear in my eyes. I feared the impending doom and realized I had made a big mistake. They called 911 and reported my case to the dispatchers, who immediately sent an ambulance. I am foaming at the mouth at this point as the first responders bombard me with questions like, "What year is it? What is the president? What color is the sky?" and other such questions, which would be a breeze to answer sober, but for me currently, I was in for a ride. The first responder's face began to morph into my deceased cousin, then a dog. Then, next thing I know, I black out. Parents said I was convulsing for 3 minutes, vomiting blood in the ambulance. I was rushed to the hospital, where I'd been put in neuro ICU. One of the only things I can recall in the hospital was pulling my IV fluids out, thinking it was a McDonald's straw. My blood pressure dropped to 50/40, with a pulse of 240. I was lucky I survived this event. I began hearing loud ringing in my ears, similar to firing a .22 caliber rifle indoors with no earplugs. My vision turned to a beautiful sky with wide stars, a rainbow painted across the cloudy, sunny sky. Angels cried and sang out as God ripped the skies apart. I could physically feel and hear this event. God said in the most empathetic, compassionate, and deep voice, "Curiosity killed the cat." At this time, it seemed completely normal. I turned my head and saw the heart rate monitor. The monitor morphed into a Roman soldier with a hole in his stomach, filled with what looked to be dead grass at the time. I began hearing loud gunfire and war cries. My vision warped and twisted until all I could see is a battlefield full of tanks and Nazi soldiers. There were 2 huge towers connected by a rope bridge in this battlefield. I saw that a soldier had hung themselves on the bridge. His neck was snapped in half. It was only hanging on by the rope. These visions were extremely graphic and brutal, as I still get trip flashbacks to this day. I black out for the rest of the duration. My parents had told me that I was poking at the air, saying my Uncle Bobby was recording me on a cornrow duff, and I had also said, "Are we done with all the work for today?" My parents had also said I was grinding my teeth extremely roughly. I had finally fallen asleep / blacked out. Doctors said my heart rate had dropped to 40, and I had torsade de pointes arrhythmias. It had taken 6 bags of intravenous fluids to get my blood thickness and hydration back to normal, as my blood was basically syrup at this point. I was shaking to the point that even after the 72-hour mark, when I stood up to use the restroom, the auto flush sensors on the toilet kept going off due to my legs shaking so horribly. To this day, I have no memory of what went down between the 48 and 60-hour mark. And to this day, I kinda deny it, but I know this is truly what deliriums do to your brain. I wake up at last, conscious, mouth still dry, vision a bit blurry, but with an overall clear headspace. I have a catheter in me. My mother and father were gone. The only one accompanying me was a nurse. She said I was to be transported to the psychiatric hospital near me. I begged him please not to go, but the deed was already done in the sense that the 5150 was already placed on me, or there was nothing me or my parents could do now. I spent 7 days in the psych ward, miserable. But that's a different story. This is all I have for you, so I thank you for listening. Remember, do not do deliriums. They will fry your brain and make you stray further from God as we know Him.